let's get started.
Yes. All right. Mute.
So like last class, San's going to be controlling the screen share. So San, can you share the first chant? All right, so let's start with our first chant. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Om. Cool. So this chant is to get us in sync for this class so that we can go from untruth to truth and from darkness to light and eventually from death to immortality. All right. So welcome back, everybody. We are making our way and we have finished the third chapter. And the third chapter kind of gave us some tools to understand how desires are formed and how we must do action which is aligned with our nature. And now we're going to enter this new section where we're going to learn how to do action and essentially do something called action-less action. So is it possible to do action that does not add to the karma or to the baggage that we are that we carry or that we build? So that's the journey that we're going to take this chapter. Anybody has any questions from the stuff that we've covered so far? Any thoughts from last week or any previous weeks? Okay, so moving on. So this new chapter is called Ending Action and Knowledge. Cool. So let's do the first verse sound. If you want to share your screen. Wait, can I not see the screen? Oh, I can see it. Cool. So does anyone want to do the Sanskrit? If not, I can do it. Anyone want to do the English? No volunteers today.
I can do English.
Okay, cool. Thanks. All right. So the first verse. 1 second. Cool. So Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Imam Visvatvate Yogam Proktavan Ham Avyayam Visvasvanam Ave Praha Manurikshva Kave Pravit.
The blessed Lord said, I taught this imperishable yoga to Vishwaswan. Vishwaswan taught to Manu. Manu taught it to Ikshvaku.
So here, yeah, so we're just getting some history about this knowledge or these tools or this yoga. And basically the implication is that it's just been transmitted from one person to the next. And these are sort of some important historical figures. It doesn't matter who they are. But essentially the idea is that this is not something that he's coming up with. It is something that has been passed on over time. And most things that are passed on over time usually tend to have some value, which is why it's passed on. So this is like one of those things. So cool. Moving on. Let's do the second one. Evam param parapraptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashta parantapa.
This knowledge, handed down thus, in regular succession, the royal sages knew. This yoga, by long lapse of time, has been lost here, O Parantapa, burner of the foes.
So Krishna, remember that Krishna is talking to Arjun, and so he's giving him some context uh, about what he's going to talk about. So not only has this been handed down for thousands of years, but it's also been lost because societies change, priorities change, and now we're living in a world of materialism where everyone wants stuff, and um, and this is a cycle that kind of goes on. It's not, and this is a conversation that's happening historically. This book was written in 500 BC, so that's 2,500 years ago. So, or even earlier, maybe 1500 BC actually. So 3,000 something years ago. So even then, he's talking about how there's a fall in spirituality and a rise in materialism. So across ages, across history, there's always been this sort of rise and fall um, of human way of living, and um, so basically this is what's happening, and we're going to continue down this thing. Okay, so let's do the next one. Arjuna vacha aparam bhavato janma param janma vishvatah katham etat dvijaniyam tvamado proktavaniti.
Arjuna said, later was your birth, and prior was the birth of Vishwasan, son. How am I to understand that you taught this yoga in the beginning?
So now this is the confusion here where Krishna is in front of Arjuna and he's talking about how he taught this to somebody, thousands of years ago. And and Arjuna is like, what are you talking about? Like, you're here. So how can you have taught this to somebody else who was born before you? So, so actually what Krishna is taught, when Krishna refers to himself as I, he's not really talking about the body as much. He's talking about who he really is. And this is sort of a doubt that comes up, and Krishna is going to answer this. So let's do the next one. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Bahuni Janmani Tava Charjuna Tanyaham Veda Sarvani Natvam Vedya Parantapa.
The blessed Lord said, many births of mine have passed as well as yours, O Arjuna. I know them all, but you them not, O Parantapa, scorcher of foes.
So here, Krishna is saying that, in Hinduism and Buddhism and some other religions, there's this idea of reincarnation and rebirth, and even evolution to some degree talks about how we move from one form, and evolve and move on to the next. Similarly, there's this idea in this tradition where we are essentially going from one body to another, where we have this body right now, but eventually we run out of life energy, but we still have this desires that we want to fulfill, but we don't have the body to fulfill them. So this body will perish, but then after some time in the future, because of our unfulfilled desires, we will pick up another body that will be fit to be able to fulfill the remaining desires that we have. And this is something that the tradition says that we can have access to this. So this is essentially just memory, right? We remember stuff from this life, but some people remember stuff from the past lives, and they could be bullshitting or they could not. We don't know. So take this as a hypothesis. But the idea is that Krishna, who is this person who is the all-knower, can actually go back and remember all his old births. So he's saying that I was the same person who taught the yoga to these people, and I am here right now as well. Whereas Arjuna cannot remember, because he's like, only can remember this, but like most of us, we cannot remember our previous births. And that's not important, not necessary for this work. It's just, sometimes some people have the divine gifts that sort of come to them. But not, if you don't, if this doesn't make sense, if you don't want to subscribe to this, that's totally fine. It's not important. Any thoughts about this? Okay, let's move on. Ajopi sajya bhuta nami shropi san prakritim swam thishtaya sambhavam yatma mayaya.
Though I am unborn and am of imperishable nature, and though I am the Lord of all beings, yet, ruling over my own nature, I take birth by my own Maya.
Cool. So here we are given and introduced a new Sanskrit term called Maya. And Maya is essentially a very interesting word because if the hypothesis is that, we are this unchangeable consciousness that doesn't take birth, that doesn't die, that always is, how is it that our experience is not like that, right? Like, how is it that we feel change? How is this world so diverse? Why are there so many things that are taking birth and, dying? How is this happening? And the explanation for that, nobody has been able to figure out why it is like that. It just is. And the word we use to describe that power is Maya. It's essentially describing a fact, which is this world is changing, and it's always changing, and it'll never be the same. But there is something beyond this world that exists. So here he's saying that even though I'm unborn, like who Krishna really is not the body. So body gets birth, body takes birth, the body changes, the body eventually dies. But the divine nature within him, within us, that's unborn. It doesn't take birth. It's still. So, that remains the same. And due to that divine nature, there is this power of the divine nature, and we call it mind. And because of the power, it appears that we have this body, and this world appears, and we exist for a while, and then we disappear. It's just like, the thoughts that we have. The thoughts that we have, they appear for some time in our minds, and they feel very real if the thought is very engaging. We can kind of get lost in our thoughts, and then they disappear. So, the sort of, the way we experience both our thoughts and both this world is very similar. It's just that this world seems a lot more real than our thoughts. But some people can be lost in their thoughts and think that is extremely real as well. So this is the power of Maya, where it creates this veil over our minds and over our intellect, and we tend to believe the things that we see. So that's the idea, and we're going to go down this journey as well. Any thoughts about this? If it doesn't make sense, put it on the shelf. We will come back to it. Okay, cool. Number 7. This is one of my favorite verses. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham.
Whenever there is decay of righteousness, O Bharata, and a rise of unrighteousness, then I manifest myself.
Cool. So here he's talking about how he came to be in the world. So if we are all unborn, what gets manifested is the body. And the body could be, the physical body. It could be the subtle mind, our thoughts. We can create thoughts. So that's always happening, where we are sort of manifesting physical sort of elements of nature. So we're creating objects and all of that. And Krishna here is specifically talking about whenever, society and like the world sort of decays a bit, which is like, the sense of righteousness, the sense of doing the right thing, if there's a rise, like a complete rise in corruption, society becomes lawless, all of that starts to happen. Some spark comes into society where like some person or some being or some idea takes hold, and that causes this change. And where does that idea come from? Comes from the infinite, which comes from the substratum, who we all are. And this is from the macro level, right? This is looking at entire society. But even if we were to look at our own individual experience, which is, when we feel like shit, when we are super depressed, when we are pained, when we are feeling a lot of pain, there comes a moment and a spark when we're like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And then that is this divine spark that is a cause of change. And that's the same idea, which is, this within myself, there is, that idea of wanting to change didn't come from anywhere outside, right? It came from within. So that spark came from within, and that sort of takes hold in our mind, and we're like, all right, now I'm going to like change, and I'm going to go down this path and change myself. So there's always this sort of balance of like evil and good. And I don't like the word evil because it's basically essentially things that are useful and things that are not useful. That's a better way to frame it. And there's always this balance that we are constantly doing things which are not useful to us and things which are useful to us. And when some balance really shifts, when we are only doing really shitty things and damaging ourselves all the time, there is this spark which comes and says, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And then we sort of go down the path of fixing ourselves and our minds, essentially. So this is not just from a macro level, this is also from a micro level, which is our own direct day-to-day experience. So any thoughts about this? Okay, so let's keep going. Paritrāṇāya sadhūnām vināṣāya ca duṣṭkritāṃ dharma sansthapanarthāya sambhavāmi yuge.
For the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of righteousness, I am born in every age.
So this is sort of describing, historically, there's always been like people who come into this world and become like, great spreaders of dharma, which is like, the path of righteousness. So, historically, we can look at like lots of saints and sages which have come in and have done a lot of good work in this world. The Buddha is an example, Jesus is an example, Moses is an example. So all these people sort of like come together and like within their sphere of influence sort of change the perspective and the thinking of people. And so, whenever like society goes to shit, there's always some person who comes in. So that's kind of the idea here. So yeah, this is still setting some context about Krishna is basically trying to sell, like he's being a good salesperson here, trying to sell that, don't worry, like, I have done this many times and you're in good hands. And because, as people who are buying a product, you don't want to buy something that is, we don't want to be the first person to use the product, right? We want like a tried and tested method. We want to make sure it works. We don't want to be the guinea pig of like a new idea. So Krishna is kind of giving Arjuna this confidence to say, don't worry, you have all these doubts. I will, clarify them and make sure that, you feel safe and protected by going down this path. It's kind of like us as well. I'm sure we all have the doubts of like, should I be doing this or not? And the idea is like, this has been done for thousands of years and it's going to continue for thousands of years. And you're in good hands if you, if you do what is prescribed. Whoops. This is missing the English. Okay, I'm sorry. I can read the English because I have my book over here. All right, let me do the Sanskrit. Janma karma cha me dvivyam evam yo veti tatvatah tvaktva deham punarjanma neti mameti sojjuna. So he who thus knows in true light my divine birth and action, having abandoned the body, he is not born again. He comes to me, O Arjuna. So he's now saying, what is the consequence of going down this path? And the consequence of going down this path and doing all the work that we've been doing or been trying to, start doing, is that we know ourselves. We will know who we are, and we will know our true nature. And once we know our true nature, we realize there is a realization, right? Which is why it's called self-realization. It's not called self-attainment, or it's not called self-procurement, right? We don't attain anything. We realize something that we always were. So if we are something that we always were, it means that we never changed to be. We didn't gain anything new. We just had I didn't notice that I was this way. So it's that sort of, it's like a aha, it's like an insight. And once we get that insight, we are never born again, because we realize that the body, the mind, all of those things are sort of separate from me, and those are born for sure. We have an experience that our body is taking birth and changing, and the body dies. There's something beyond that is unborn. And once we come there, and once we go there, and we can be in from act from that place, then the body and the mind automatically, we lose our identity so much with it. It's like we realize that it is a part of us, but it is not our complete experience. So you can wear the body like we wear clothes, which is very lightly, right? You don't think you are your clothes. When they get dirty, you can just wash them or whatever. So you take care of them. You take care of your body in the same way. But we don't sort of get so attached to it, thinking that we will perish if the body perishes. And that is a direct experience. It's not an intellectual understanding. So we will get, if we have a real taste of that, our, the way we start looking at the world. So that is the hypothesis. So let's all get there. Any thoughts about this? Okay.
Yeah, I have a question, Puneet.
Sure.
So when you say wearing your body like a cloth or something, is it recommended to, I mean, you mean dissociating from this physical sort of realm? Is that something that...
We cannot really disassociate, because it is always with us. It is more about not taking what it reports very seriously. So, so give me an example of are there situations where we are constantly thinking about our body? Or do you just, you have a body, and, you have to take care of it. You have to eat food, you have to shower, you have to poop, you have to do all these things, because those are sort of the law and the nature with which the body operates. But we just do those things, and that's it. And after that, we don't really think about the body that much. Maybe you want to dress up nicely or whatever you want to do, and that's fine. But then once you're done doing that, the awareness of the body doesn't really arise that much. Or, if it does, then we shouldn't constantly thinking about the body all the time and thinking it's not well and it needs to be maintained is a distraction. So it's like this, we have this desire. So going back to the previous chapter, we have these desires in us which are very strong. So if one of the desires is I must maintain my body so that it's in the peak performance, that's a very strong desire. Then all of our energy is going to be directed at just that, right? And the body is realizing that the body is a physical object, and it is subject to degradation. No matter what we do, it is going to degrade and it's eventually going to perish. So trying to hold on to something that will degrade and perish is a losing battle, because you may be able to sustain it for a few years, but like 20 years from now, it is going to degrade. And if our entire identity was associated to preserving the body and having the best body and maintaining it, then we are going to be disappointed in 20 years from now. Not to say that it's not worth having a fit body and all of that. That's totally fine, but not putting our entire attention and identity into just the body is what I'm trying to say. So, do what is necessary and do the normal stuff. You can't completely disassociate, right? Like you have to take a shower, you have to go poop, you have to do all those things. Does that help, Iladri?
Yeah. I was just thinking because wouldn't it, or I mean, a lot of times they do prescribe that to deepen the connection with your body, which then in turn helps you also deepen the other spiritual aspects of the mind as well, right? Because there is this also mind-body sort of unification or yoga, essentially. So how does this sort of play into that?
So in this work, we say the mind is a subtler form of the body, or the other way, which is the body is a grosser form of the mind. And gross and subtle here means vibrationally, the mind is like subtle, and vibrationally the body is gross. So yes, the mind is the body actually. It's not, there's not like, we have this Western sort of new age ideas of like mind over matter and stuff. That is kind of okay, but if you go even deeper, the mind is the body. There's no distinction. The entire world is actually just mind thoughts vibrating. And some vibrations are strong and they become manifested into physical objects, and some are just in the thought realm and they remain there. So depending on how much energy we put into those ideas, we manifest things in the physical world. So we're getting a little bit into like a little woo-woo stuff, but the idea is that if you want to put in stuff into your body, that's totally fine, but just notice that you are not the body and you're not the mind. So whatever you do with the body and the mind, that's great, but eventually we have to kind of step away from that and see that we are actually, the body and the mind is an experience that happens in our awareness, right? Even the fact that you say, I have a body, what does that mean? Which means that there is something separate from the body that is experiencing the body, right? So that's a hypothesis to say, okay, am I not the body? And start to examine that and see if that is true. That are you just the body or are you just the mind? And if you are, then great. If you're not, then also great. Like, so start to play with that idea. Don't just believe that you are the body and the mind. Is what the work presents.
All right, thanks.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's do the next one. Vitaraga bhaya krodha manyama mamupashritaha bahavo jnana tapastha puta madbhava magataha.
Freed from attachment, fear, and anger, absorbed in me, taking refuge in me, purified by the fire of knowledge, many have attained my being.
All right, so here we are given the sort of three things that prevent us from realizing the self, which is attachment, fear, and anger. And these are sort of, I guess, anger is more of a consequence, I suppose. But all of these have a root in desire, which is I have a desire. It's very strong, and if it is always coming true. Sorry, was just, did somebody say anything?
फोटो नहीं आ रहा है
Okay, can somebody mute if you're not asking a question? Sound, I think you may have to mute them if they're not going to mute. But anyway, so saying, so the idea is that desire is the root of it all. And, you know, so if I have a strong desire to, let's say, acquire a lot of wealth, and if I'm very successful at it, then slowly that impression of wealth becomes an attachment, right? So I'm like, now I have a lot of money and now I'm attached to wealth. And then because of that attachment, now there is fear of losing what I have. So fear is always a consequence of like either having a bunch of stuff and then fear of losing it, or, you know, fear of not existing. And I guess fear is always rooted in this idea that I am somehow no longer going to exist. So it's sort of this existential fear that we have, that we are no longer going to exist. And it could be projected on any object, which is could be money, it could be relationships, all of that have this root of fear. And then anger, on the other hand, is more like I have tried a bunch of stuff, it didn't work, and now I'm angry about it. And I want it to be different than it is right now. So all of those actually are consequences of desires. And desire here is like not, you know, I want to go for a walk in the park. It's more of these insistent kind of desires, which is, I will be happy if, you know, those kinds of desires where we attach extreme amounts of happiness and satisfaction to the outcome. And when the outcome isn't according to our imagination, then all of these emotions happen, fear and anger and all of that. So if we can free ourselves from these raw emotions, and then, you know, taking refuge in me is more about like, you know, letting the mind abide in your own self. And in, so like I said before, the Gita can be read from 3 levels. So when Krishna is talking about himself, he's basically talking about the self in you. So, you know, so absorbed in me is basically saying the mind is absorbed in the self. The attention of the mind is not on the stupid desires that I have, but it is on the self. Because all my desires and the volume level of my desires and the thoughts have sort of come down, and the mind is no longer focusing on external stuff. So the mind is essentially no longer a mind, because it is just aware of it, of the awareness. So, you know, and then, you know, the same idea as it takes refuge in me is just that it's there for a long time. And once this mind has this direct experience that it is not the desires, it is not my personality, it's not the body, because all those things are not available in this state. Because in the state, my attention to my thoughts has gone down, my attention to the body has gone down. So my body is actually not even available for perception. It's almost like, you know, it's a complete blank, but blank with complete awareness. So in that fire of knowledge, where we are having a taste of our direct being and who we really are, we, you know, attain my being. It's like language here, but essentially you realize the self. So that is the process where we are, you know, going through a journey of like trying to reduce the volume levels of our mind, which is, you know, through single pointed attention, through, you know, not reacting to our senses, what it reports, you know, keeping our attention and our attentive faculty introverted, where we are not constantly shooting forward and like, you know, trying to judge everything that we see. Being from that place, staying there for a while, what's going to happen is our mind is going to start to getting reprogrammed a little bit. And then when we meditate and when we sort of be in isolation, this thing is a possibility, where we get a taste of our own being and we get absorbed in ourselves. Any thoughts about this? So this is the entire process, and what happens, and we're going to, you know, go through how to do it. But this is like the Cliff Notes version of the teachings.
Yeah, I have a thought. I know before you were mentioning that the mind and the body are not our true selves, and that we have some of these feelings that make us more attached to things in this world, which are not necessary. But my question is, how do we differentiate the difference between the feelings such as fear, anger, the ones that are not our true self, and the feelings that are our true selves, like our inner compass trying to share with us what our true nature is?
So I would go ahead and say something crazy. I would say there's no feeling that is your true self, because a feeling is essentially still external. So every feeling, be it good feeling or like like you're feeling great or you're feeling miserable, they are still an external feeling, right? It's still something that you're experiencing moment to moment. So whatever you're actually experiencing can never really be you. It is definitely, certainly like an experience, but um, it isn't you. But some feelings are more useful than others, right? So a feeling like fear and anger isn't useful because we are only concerned with one thing here, which is like, how do I free myself, right? And feelings like fear and anger bind us even more because we believe those feelings, and any feeling that is believed will entangle us, because that's when that same feeling occurs again, we will take that feeling to be real and suffer the consequences of it. The same thing with you know extreme feelings of pleasure as well. If we take those feelings as real as well, we are going to suffer a little bit as well. When we'll come to that a little later, but right now we can deal with the negative feelings much easier because fear. Everyone wants to get rid of fear and anger, and crave like the sort of being hooked on to something like attachment. Everyone wants to get rid of that. Nobody wants to say, "Oh, I don't want to be blissed out," right? Like that's everybody wants to be blissed out all the time. So we're starting with the place where everyone's at, which is I don't want to hold on to fear and anger. It'd be great if I don't have fear and anger. So we want to start from there, but later we will come to a place where we even want to get rid of all of the other feelings. So so but the other aspect, what you said, is inner compass. Those are more about like what are the things I should do in this world, right?
Yes.
Was that like what are some things, and that's fine. That is more about how do I act in a way that is true to my own like nature and all of that, right? And that you will know. So things that are uh, uh, that don't produce like feelings like fear and anger uh, while you're doing them is probably like more suited and more aligned to your nature. And things that are that you're while you're doing them and you're fearful and angry, then probably not suited for you. So for example, let's say you want to become a singer, and you have a lot of fear and anger about it. That may still be your thing that you need, like that you have to do, or you're something that's aligned to you, because while you're doing it, you feel great. While you're singing, you're on the stage, once you start the process, it feels great. But like there may be a lot of fear and anger and stuff before, and that's fine. That's because we are still sort of imagining uh, uh, things about whether we will succeed or fail and all of that. That's fine. um, but your inner compass will tell you. And how will it tell you? You would kind of have to just start to listen to it a little bit, and quieten your mind so that all of the other stuff kind of is not distracting us. So we can just be like more sensitive to how we really feel about whatever activity that we are trying to do. Does that make sense, Becca?
Yes, for the most part. I think I was asking more specifics, but maybe it's not something that you can guide in knowing the difference. It's basically intuition, right?
It
Knowing
is
the difference
intuition.
between intuition and feelings, because sometimes that can be difficult to differentiate.
Yeah, and the thing about intuition is it cannot be taught. right? It's something that is an experience within you. So you know for your own self what is right and wrong. All that, and intuition is sort of, I think, a consequence. It isn't something that is the goal, right? Intuition is a consequence because we start to develop our own sense of right and wrong for our own self. Like what may be right for you may not be right for somebody else, right? So you're intuitively, you know for your own self what is, what is something that is useful and what is something that's not useful. So that is something that we need to develop, each of us, for our own self. And that can only happen if we start to pay attention to our inner being, which is, not paying attention to the stupid thoughts, because all the thoughts that we kind of have been absorbed, right? Just like this body is sort of an accumulation of the food we eat, all the thoughts and personality we have is an accumulation. It's like the reason why you have a thought about, let's say, I don't know, you know, saving, the planet in terms of, like, let's say plastics or something, is because you may be surrounded by people, or like you may be reading stuff about it. Right? It's not some original thought that has come into your being. We have accumulated those things, and we keep thinking that those are the things that I need to keep, like, thinking about. But once we get rid of all of those things, what eventually comes out, if a thought does come out, you will know for a fact that that is something that is pure and untainted by any social expectations or any sort of uh, other sort of influence. It'll be a pure thought, and that will be something that you will want to do or not want to do, and that's the intuition that you will start to develop. But the idea is that, can we remove all of the crap that we have sort of absorbed and stop paying attention to that? And can we distinguish between our true being and thoughts? Once we start to do that, then it becomes much easier. So start to get established in what it means to be living from that place. So, the previous verse where it says, I guess in this verse, where you're absorbed in me, get there. Let's try to get there first. Let's be absorbed in our own being.
Thank you.
And then the consequence will be, our compass will automatically get aligned.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Great question. Any other thoughts?
Hey, Puneet. Is there any distinction you can make here between desire and purpose in this context, like in the context of fear and anger? I guess I'm trying to differentiate between something that you desire and the lack of it, or not fully attaining it is causing fear and anger. But when you are driven by something that you feel is your purpose in life, or professionally, or so forth, and then you're not able to achieve that or attain that, you still feel some fear and anger. And I believe having a purpose or having some is good, and is sort of in a way sort of closer to realizing who you are and what your purpose in this world is. And
Yeah.
So I'm not fully articulating it, but I think you get what I'm asking.
Yeah. So you're asking, I still feel like you may still feel fear, anger, and attachment, even when you're aligned and doing things which are aligned to your purpose, right? And how does that work with this stuff we are talking about? Is that accurate?
Yes, kind of, yeah.
Yes. So you can still have a purpose, and you can still strive to go down that path. I think the fear and anger and all of that comes from is a sort of a consequence of putting too much value or too much investment into the outcome. So for example, let's say your purpose is to create like, clean energy or something, right? If that's your purpose, whether it comes true or not is not up to you, right? It's not just solely up to you. Let's say you have a company which is trying to do that, and you're striving very hard, and of course, like being, the physical world is going to present all these like emotions of fear and anger and stuff, but they're just momentary, right? It's like I'm momentary angry at somebody because they didn't do what I wanted them to do or something. And but like fear is more about like, if this doesn't happen, then I won't exist. Like those kinds of emotions, which are mostly like existential in a way. Like if you don't end up making clean energy, that's okay, but at least you spent like your life invested in something that you wanted to do and you were probably good at and you cared about, right? And you were involved in that entire process. That is what is important. But if you're constantly thinking about like, oh, I may not do it, it may not work, this may not happen, like that's how we want to look at this, which is like, what is our moment to moment experience? While I'm doing the work, am I constantly thinking about something else? Am I constantly thinking about how I'm going to fail, how I may not make it, or how I don't have enough money? All those things. Is that happening while I'm doing moment to moment work? Because work is in front of me, and I have a lot of things to do. But where is my mind? Is it here or is it somewhere else? That's kind of how we want to look at it. And if it can be here, more like because I am doing whatever activity I'm doing. Let's say I'm thinking about how to solve some problem. I'm engaged in that. I'm finished. Now I have some free time. Now I may think about, oh, I need some amount of money. I don't have, maybe we are working without any money or something. So there's all these other thoughts that may come later, but that's coming later because you're consciously choosing to think about it. It isn't unconsciously happening and springing up and distracting us from the stuff we have to do. Because that's kind of how most of us live, right? Like, because our minds have become too much of a burden where we believe everything it throws up. So even when we have a lot of things to do, we still we waste so much energy and time thinking about the past, thinking about the worries about the future, all of that, which isn't useful because they're not really solving any problem. They're just like sort of these leeches, which is sucking our energy from us. So how can we completely destroy that? It doesn't mean that you not have let's say you don't make any money. The consequence of that is you may have to live on the street or something, right? Like there are consequences to everything, but then we'll be able to deal with those consequences because we will always try to be solution oriented, which is what can I do to fix this situation? What are the actions I can take? If I don't have money, okay, I will have to do some stuff which will give me money, right? Like we will look at every problem from a practical standpoint and not from a very always this ideological thing that doesn't really solve the problem. I don't know if this helps, but that's kind of where we want to get to, which is be solution oriented. And fear and anger is, yes, it will happen. And those are moment to moment as well, but they will not affect us as much as their purpose is. Fear and anger, they're sort of emotions which get out of hand when we believe them, right? Like if we are angry, if anger comes up because somebody did something stupid, we can look at it and be like, wow, this person did something stupid and I'm angry about it. But then what is our next action that we can take? It's like, it's essentially a signal that we are getting that we need to do something, right? And how we act is our choice. We can choose to yell at that person. Maybe that person deserves it. Or we can say, okay, maybe that person doesn't need to be yelled at because that's going to be counterproductive to what I want to happen, right? So it's all of that. So we start to take control of our own life to say, what can I do? What action can I do with the best of my knowledge that will be most useful? And it's not just about unconsciously reacting and worrying.
Right.
I don't know if that helps, but those were my thoughts.
It does. I think, just the detachment from I would say the desire of the future or the desire associated with the future, or the nostalgia for the past is sort of something hard to give up. And I think that attachment is, yeah, I understand. Yeah, the attachment is kind of what is causing the.
And it's hard to give up because there is a lot of energy associated to those memories, or like to some worry that we have about the future, right? And why is there so much energy to it? Because we have given it energy. It's not like it's magically appeared out of nowhere. So if I'm worried about, paying mortgage to my house or something, or like, the loan, paying the loan for my home, it's become such a huge thing in my mind, is because I've continuously thought about it for a long time, and now I just cannot help myself that this thought comes up and I get absorbed in it. And it's not magically. So we must understand that all of our worries we have created. They have not magically appeared into us. We have given it. So we have to start to take responsibility for our entire experience of fear and worry and anger. Because if we don't take responsibility for it, we will not be able to change it. So start by realizing that all of our worries we have absorbed. It has not been magically, created within us. Once we take responsibility for it, what can we do, right? So the hypothesis is, if we stop paying attention to it, it degrades. The energy starts to dissipate. So which is why single-pointed attention is very good, because while you're single-pointedly focused on something, you're not thinking about the worry. And if the worry starts to come up, bring your attention back to the work, bring your attention back to work. So that's the effort that we are constantly trying to make. And by that effort, magically, all these sort of energized thoughts and worries that we were holding on to, the energy starts to dissipate. And some thought that was very powerful will not be as powerful as it was. In a few months, you'll see that change. Because why? Because we stopped investing in that thought. The only reason it is so powerful is because we invest in that thought by thinking about it and ruminating about it and thinking about all the possible situations and scenarios that it would fail or succeed or whatever. So start to notice that is what we're doing. It is not, it's hard, yes, but it is hard because we are giving it more energy all the time. It's definitely hard, but once we start to have this basic understanding of like our responsibility to those worries, we can start to make changes. And those changes are what is going to be very beneficial.
Thanks for it.
Cool. So, yeah, thank you for that. That's a very good question. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's do the next one. All right, so this is the next one. Okay. Ye yatha mam prapatyante tasthavitteva bhajamyaham mama vartman nuvartante manushya partha sarvashah. In whatever way people approach me, even so do I reward them. My path, in whatever way people approach me, even so do I reward them. My path do people tread in all ways, O son of Partha. Cool. So, we have all these different ways of reaching this final goal, which is knowing who we are. We have cultures from across the world, religions from across the world, all of them talk about this final goal, which is expressed in language in different ways because of, the limitations of language. But what Krishna is saying, that he or she, he exists, like, and you actually is the underlying substratum of it all, and all paths are valid. Because, if you believe in praying, then that is going to work for you, because, it's all about what you believe. Because whatever subtilizes your mind, whatever allows your mind to quieten down, the truth is revealed. So it doesn't matter what we do in the end. We could pray, we could, chant, we could like do rosary things, we can go on pilgrimages, but know that those actions that we are taking should be done to quieten the mind. That's it. All we have to do, all of like yogic practices, religious practices, their true purpose is to quieten the mind. Because once the mind is quietened, it is a consequence that we will see our own nature. Right now, the mind, it's like, we are walking in this field and the grass is like really tall, right? And you can't see shit. It's like everything is blocked. And the only way to see is to cut the grass. And all of these practices are essentially cutting the grass. And once the grass is cut, you can't see. It's a consequence. You don't have to do anything extra. So that's kind of thing. And here he's saying that, so in any aspect, if the mind is quietened, great, you will get a taste of your own self. So, if you listen to like beautiful music and that like stops your mind, the bliss of the self is revealed in those moments. It's just that our attention is on the music, so we don't tend to notice it as much. But with this conscious sort of with the mind being a little bit more conscious about what is going on, when we get moments of like extreme bliss and extreme ecstasy, start to see that, what is happening is my own self, my own being is being revealed to me, and it feels very blissful. So like when you go to a concert and, let's say you're going to an orchestra where it's like so beautiful, and what happens is like everybody is, or at least you are so focused on the music, you're not thinking about your purpose, you're not thinking about your company, you're not thinking about whether your friends are friends like you, all of those ideas, you're not thinking about it. You're just focused on the music. And because of that, we feel really good, right? We love going to concerts. We love going to things where our attention gets zapped into one thing. And the reason why that is because the bliss of the self is revealed in those moments. But our ignorant mind attributes it to the play or the music or like the movie, all of those things, but it's actually our own self. So don't worry, like whatever path that we take, it is going to lead us to the end. And that's the idea in this verse. So how much time do we have? We have 10 minutes. Okay, we can do one more. Any thoughts about this one? Cool. Let's do verse 12. Oh, sorry, 14. Namam karmani lipyanti name karma phale spriha iti mam yobhijanati karma bhinsa badhyate.
Actions do not taint me, nor have I any desire for the fruits of action. He who knows me thus is not bound by his actions.
Cool. So this word that they use, spriha, that's an interesting word. It's a word which is, I think it means to thirst. It has this sort of implication of like being parched. It's almost like it's a super hot day and you're walking on, the sun scorching and you're super thirsty for water. And the feeling of like, I want water, like I'm so thirsty. So it's that gnawing feeling that we have. And that's usually how we look at the fruits of actions, right? Where we're like, I really want the outcome. Like, I don't care about like, so let's say you want to get this job in this particular company. You really want the outcome. We're not really enjoying the process of like getting ready for that job, right? Like studying or like whatever preparations we're doing. We are only concerned about the fruit, which is getting the job. And until that happens, there's this thirst that I want it. So that's kind of how we are defining the desire for the fruits of action. This thirst, this deep thirst. And what Krishna is saying is that for him, or for like you, the real you, the being in you, that being has no desire for the actual fruits. And he's saying that actions don't taint me, and in this sense, taint, it means that it doesn't bind that person. So, you know, for example, what's a good habit? So let's say I guess I'm gonna go to food again. I love eating chocolate cake, right? So if I go through with that action without this knowledge, what I'm going to believe is that it's the chocolate cake, which is really good. And when I eat the chocolate cake, my impression that chocolate cake has joy producing properties is getting stronger. It's getting stronger. So in the future, when I'm feeling miserable, when I'm, you know, whatever, I'm going to think about chocolate cake, because in the past, I gave joy producing properties to the cake. So I would want something that is joy producing in this present moment. So cake will appear in my mind. That's the process in which how I have built this connection between chocolate cake and me. So what Krishna is saying here is that any action he does, or, you know, any action that any person of realization does, they will never build this bond, because they know that the object is not the cause of bliss. It's only a false understanding. So, you know, a person who, like Krishna, can enjoy the same cake. You know, he eats the same cake, feels blissful, feels great, but he knows for a fact that it's not the cake which is giving him pleasure. It's his own being that is being revealed through the cake. And that's sort of a direct experience and understanding, and it's not something that you have to keep thinking about all the time. It's like a consequence. It's like it's become natural. It's become a part of his being. So because we have this understanding now, he's saying that people whoever know this about me, they're not bound by their actions. So it doesn't matter what you do after that. Any action, it doesn't matter. It could be the most addictive thing from, you know, somebody else's perspective, but the person doing it is never going to be touched by it, because they know for a fact that whatever action they do isn't going to affect their own being, which is always a witness to the, you know, to the body, to the actions, to the mind, all of that. There is this huge separation. And that's the implication of this verse. So we need to understand that all actions are bound to the body and the mind. So every action you're doing is always altering the mind. It does not alter the real you. The real you is always watching it, and it's watching the altered mind. It's watching the action. It's watching the consequences. Always watching. And you know, so once the mind has sort of this introversion and this direct experience of the real you, which is always watching, then this kind of kind of collapses. The mind, like the structure of the mind collapses, where the mind no longer really believes itself. Like every thought that appears is sort of ephemeral, where it can come, you can work with it, and then it's gone. And what remains is just this being. So that's sort of the where we want to get to. How do we do actionless actions? Because what we're doing is karma yoga, and karma here is action. And every action that we do has consequences based on how we do the action. So if we do an action from, like, you know, the three states of mind that we spoke about earlier, which is the, you know, the tamasic state, which is ignorance, the rajasic state, which is a state of like passion, and sattva state of like, you know, purity and clarity. So depending on where we do these actions, they have a certain consequence. So actions done from the lower state, with the state of ignorance, from the tamasic state, end up with creating more and more aversions. Things done from the rajasic state end up creating more and more attachments and more desires. And done from the sattvic state don't create any bonds. So that's basically how each action, what consequences each action has. So what Krishna is saying here is that once you realize the self, you go beyond even the states of mind. Like even rajas, tamas and things, they don't affect you at all. And we will kind of go through that idea as well, I think. Any thoughts about this? Okay, maybe you can do one more. Cool. Evam gyatva kritam karma purvair api mumukshibhihi guru kameva tasmatvam purve purva taram kritam.
Having known this, the ancient seekers after freedom also performed action. Therefore, you too perform action as did the ancients in the olden times.
So Krishna here is trying to read Arjuna's mind, where Arjuna may be thinking about how he should probably abandon what he needs, what he's doing. He should like renounce everything and go and sit in the mountains and, give up on life and, go to basically get rid of all of the responsibilities that he has in his life, because, everybody wants to focus on this work and he's thinking that having all these responsibilities is preventing me from like being spiritual, right? And Krishna is clearing his doubt and saying, all of the ancient seekers who are also seeking freedom, they did action, because action is not in opposition to liberation. It's only how you do the action. So if you do action in a way that doesn't create more baggage and bondage, you will be fine. So learn how to do it that way. So that way you can be in this world and yet be, free from it. So, so how do we do actions that is actionless? And we're going to learn about that in the next class. I think we're about off time. So that's the idea. We cannot run away from responsibilities, because if we are running away from responsibilities, we are creating more bondage. That's the simple fact of life too. So if something is in your life, you do it. And if it's not in your life, then there's nothing to be done. So because if we run away from something, and if it's something that we have not completely resolved, it's going to come back to us in the future. And I think we all have those kinds of experiences where we quit a job because we don't like our boss, and we're like, this guy is horrible, or this woman is horrible, I'm going to go to a different job. And then the same boss or the similar kind of a person appears in that job. Because what has happened is we have run away from this karmic connection or something that we have and we're holding on to. And because we haven't resolved it and we have abandoned it without actually resolving it, it appears again. So it could be in the form of like bosses, it could be in the form of a partner, all of those things. Some people tend to attract the same partners over and over again. Why? Because we are ignorant of the fact that we are somehow averse to what is in front of me and we have not resolved it. Because we haven't resolved it, we are not karmically free from it. And the same thing appears in someplace else. So instead of like running away, do the actions, do the work, and be free from it. And then it'll be completely gone from our lives. All right, so I have a question here. How to resolve certain issues? Great question. So give me an example.
Just like you mentioned about running away from certain bosses, I had one such experience where about 2 years back, I had one horrible boss, and I resigned from that organization.
Okay.
Because of certain activities which I thought were not ethical. So the boss said that, okay, you can resign, but you need to serve your notice period.
Right.
And I did serve my notice period, and then my boss refused to pay me for my notice period. Okay. And then he, kept on throwing this and that for me and that at me. And, finally it all went very sour and he's still not paid me till date. And I'm not in a situation where I can get back to him legally to, having to pay me for what happened.
Right.
Now, I know it's something that is old, and it is good to forgive and forget as long as I know that, I was not the person who did anything wrong. But there is always this sense of sourness that I have towards him.
Yeah.
I feel I want to eliminate it because I don't even know if it bothers him at all, but it bothers me that I hate someone or something they did.
So the first thing to understand is that when people do shitty things to you, it's not about you. It's about some unresolved issue that they have within themselves. So you just happen to be in their experience, so they just like had an outlet towards you, but they have something within themselves that is so painful that it is, and the consequence of that is they are just mean and we're in this situation, they're just like being assholes, right? And so when we want to start to let me step back a little bit. So if we look at somebody who's being mean and unethical and stuff, we can try to see in our own life, like my teacher loves to explain this in the same way, which is we can look at our own lives and say, have we been unethical or mean, not into that extent, but in a small way. And what was my frame of mind when I was in that situation? Most likely I was fearful, I was afraid, I was angry, right? So what we're starting to do is we're trying to start to build like some sense of empathy towards our own self, where we understand why we do things which hurt other people. So once we understand that, then we can start to understand why somebody else does things in the same way. So that, then we start to build a sense of like empathy and forgiveness, and that becomes a consequence. Like we can't like just say, oh, I just want to forgive this person, because that's just an intellectual thing, right? You want to deeply feel like what it must be to do something so painful or like do something so crazy. They must be really damaged individuals. So once we start to get a sense of that, then forgiveness is naturally an outcome. Like you don't have to think of like, oh, I want to forgive him or I should forgive him, it's the right thing to do, because those ideals will fail us in the moment of crisis. So encounter that person again and he's meeting you again, then again what's going to happen is that memory is going to trigger and you're going to be sour again. But instead, if you can start to understand like why that person is like that and why they act in that way, and mostly it is because of fear, lack of love, anger, whatever it is, like all these emotions that kind of contract people's hearts. And then the other thing that you said, which is forgive and forget. I would not say forgive and forget. I would say forgive, but don't forget. Because when we forget, we end up doing the same things again, right? We make the same mistakes again. And so, remember that this person did something crazy in the past, but forgive him for that because he acted or she acted out of pain, essentially. And if you can, and doesn't mean you have to become extremely benevolent towards everybody. Like like you said, if you wanted to take action against that person, you can, but if you don't want to, that's fine too. But do what is needed in the moment, and that sense of rightness and what needs to be done will come as and when we don't, our mind starts to get a little bit more quiet. Does that help, Govind?
Definitely, it does help a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's hard work because they did something mean to you and bad to you. So that memory is always there. But trying to understand the other person's perspective can help in forgiving that person.
If I can take take another minute,
Sure.
I just relate this to something that happened to me at school. I had a very painful, physical assault and fight and a humiliating fight back in school days with one of the guys in my class. Okay, so somehow it just never got resolved. It was just, a fight happened and we were at the other ends of the spectrum. But after, say, 18 years, the same incident played in my entire dream just about a week back. Okay, so probably, and I woke up in the morning very disturbed. And
when you say the same instance replayed, you mean you remembered it? Like it was like a memory that came, a flashback?
Yes, photographic. So the entire incident played in my mind again in the dream.
Right.
So, and then I thought, okay, wait, probably, and I had forgotten this incident for several years. I'm like, it was just an incident. So I thought, if this thing played back in my dream, I've somewhere not really forgiven this person because it's still hurting me.
Mm-hmm.
So and we were in school back then, so it just not so mature guys, and fights keep happening. So that's okay. So I actually called up this chap. I still have his number. So, and I said, if you remember, this incident happened and stuff like that, and this played in my dream. And the only reason I've called you is to say that I want to forgive you for whatever happened. And the best reply I ever got was, if it makes you feel any better, I want to apologize for that, is what he said. So,
wow.
That's sort of a lot of things, So I guess, yeah, that's what probably you mean by saying forgive and not forget.
Right. That's wonderful. That was like really, really good yoga that you did, which is, having the courage to face something that is painful, right? And usually what we tend to do is just like put it on the side and suppress and never and hope that we forget it. But like, if we can make amends and call that person, full credit to you for going down that route.
No, right? I think I just felt like doing that, and I guess probably it paid back.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This is very, very good yoga.
Thank you, Puneet.
Cool. Anybody else want to share anything? All right. So let's. We have about 12 minutes. So let's do a meditation. So everybody, make sure you're sitting up. If you're lying down, try to sit up straight, maybe in a chair or on your bed. If you're feeling sleepy, you can maybe keep your eyes open. And just start by taking a few deep breaths. And just noticing how your body is feeling in this moment. If there's any tension in any part of the body, just gently scan your body from the head all the way to the feet. On the exhale, just imagine all of the tension being released. You do that a couple more times. And just completely settle into your bodies. Just by consciously breathing, we've naturally put ourselves in the position of witnessing our body and our breath. So we have this attentive faculty in our minds where we can focus on a specific thing. You can focus on the breath. You can focus on sensations on the body. So if you're sitting on a chair, You can focus on the sensations of the chair against your body. You can focus on the sensations of the clothes against your skin. So we can keep moving this from one point to another, this attentive faculty that we have. So if thoughts are coming up, our attention can go to the thoughts. If it's a very juicy thought, we tend to get absorbed in the thought, and more thoughts come by, and we start to get lost in that thought, in the story of that thought. But if we realize that we are lost, we can shift our attention back to something else. So we can bring it back to the breath. Or we can even keep it on the thought, but without adding more thoughts to it. We can just notice that thinking is happening. And sooner or later, that thought dissipates. And maybe a new thought appears. But we are more interested in the space between the two thoughts. Not really interested in the thought. And in the space between one thought ending and the other thought beginning, try to see if you can put an attention to the background from which these thoughts are appearing. Try to see who is it that is seeing these thoughts. See if you can get a sense of an empty sky or space. In which these thoughts are appearing and disappearing. That empty space is yourself. The space is always available. In space are thoughts, emotions, sensations, the breath even, the body. They're all stuff in the space of consciousness or awareness. So the space between the thoughts may be very small, maybe for a moment, could be just a nanosecond. But doing this will keep increasing that gap. From a nanosecond could be a microsecond, become a millisecond. You want to keep noticing the background, the context. slowly bring your attention back to objective reality. Whenever you're ready, you may open your eyes. Cool, so let's end the class by doing our chant. Sam, can you share the screen again? Thanks. Cool. So whoever wants to sing can sing, or you can just listen as well. Yogarato va, bhogarato va, yogarato va, bhogarato va, sangarato va, sangavihina, sangarato va, Sangavihina Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chitta Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chitta Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva. So one thing I was thinking about what Govind said, you know, leaving situations. So in the case of his boss, or let's say you have a boss that you don't like and you want to leave, it's fine to leave. You know, it's not about sticking in a shitty situation and just being there because of this idea that we shouldn't abandon anything. It's more about when we leave, are we leaving with a sense of neutrality, or are we leaving from a sense of, you know, aversion or like anger or anything like that. So when we leave any situation, leave with a sense of neutrality, because the karma of that situation will not come back in the future, where you will not be thinking about that person or that situation, because you're done. There is closure. So that's what I meant by not by not trying to abandon it too early, because we tend to do that, where we just abandon things before we actually complete it. So that's it. That's all I wanted to add to do. So thank you everyone for wonderful questions and thoughts today. It was really, really fun. I'm happy to stick around and answer any additional questions or thoughts. But that's the end of the class.
Thank you, Puneet.